3, 2, 1. Here we go. Vox Day. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you so much.
This is Thanksgiving week.
Thanksgiving weekend, in fact, you're fortunate because we're actually inadvertently living the meme, and we are going to have a second Thanksgiving tonight.
Excellent. I look forward to that.
2 turkeys.
Excellent. So we just finished also finished the month of November. That was an uneventful month.
Yeah, just the small, the small. You'll have to excuse us. We have a guest. Anyhow, it was just a small event of Donald Trump, the second coming of the God Emperor, we hope. Although the question is, which Donald Trump are we going to get? Are we going to get the Donald Trump who wants to go to war with the deep state, or are we going to get the Donald Trump who wants to brag about poisoning everyone with vaccines?
Yeah. There's the one that can do peace in Ukraine in 2 days. We're still waiting. And there's the one who can obliterate Iran.
Right. And the problem is that, Trump is first and foremost a negotiator. Mm-hmm. That's his strength. That's what he's good at. And that's why I think that it's not necessary to take his bellicosity too seriously. When you look at what he's saying, he's just trying to establish his negotiating point.
Yes.
One thing about Trump is dating back to his time in the Vietnam Wars, he's never had any interest in war. He's a businessman. He views war as being bad for business, as opposed to being, like the military-industrial complex, believing that war is business. He's against that sort of thing. He's always been against that sort of thing. There's one thing he's been consistent about. And the 2 things that we know about Donald Trump is he likes beautiful women, and he does not like war. And so I understand where a lot of people who supported Trump in 2016 are somewhat skeptical about what he actually intends to do, especially in light of the way that there's still too many neocons and still too many deep state friendly figures, and frankly, with paper American figures. Somebody said, has he actually nominated an actual American to any cabinet position yet? It's all these Indian Americans and South African Americans and all this sort of thing. That's a bit problematic too. But at the end of the day, I think it's important to remember that he doesn't like the deep state. He doesn't like what's been happening for the last 4 years. And he was, the first time around, despite his many defects and flaws, he was still the best president the U.S. has had since Andrew Jackson.
Oh yeah, anyone who doesn't make new wars is pretty good by history standards. Now, of course, one has to be, you said, skeptical. Being skeptical is very important in terms of politics, because as they say in France, the promises of politicians only are only to be held by the people who believe in them, not by the people who give them.
Right.
So we have to be very skeptical, and we always have to have plans, right? The plan: what if this happens? What if it doesn't, or something else happens? Have a plan B or C or D, so that you can make business, you can live your life in good ways, whatever happens. It's more and more important. So perhaps let's go topic by topic on what has been happening. So
sure.
Let's take some of the fronts of the war. Let's stay with the quiet one, China.
China's been definitely warning people. The fact that the U.S. just announced a $385 million arms deal with Taiwan, and the Chinese have been very forthright about their unhappiness about this. At the end of the day, I don't think that there's going to be a hot front in the South Pacific, simply because the potential allies of the U.S. military are simply in no shape to take on China. I mean, Nissan just announced that Nissan might be collapsing within 12 months.
Yep.
When you've got that level of industrial collapse, how are you even going to think about arming for a war
Yeah.
against the biggest industrial power on earth. It's not happening. And
No, owning Renault probably didn't help.
no. And so if you look at what's happening there, and also you look at how the primary target of Trump's main rhetoric has been Russia.
Yeah.
It's pretty clear that the neocon idea of pivoting from Russia to China, pivoting from Ukraine to Taiwan, just really doesn't seem to be happening. That doesn't mean it can't, but I personally think that the reunification of Taiwan, which is it's inevitable, but I think it's going to look a lot more like the reunification of Hong Kong than, I think that's the model rather than some sort of military conflict.
Now, on the economic side of that front, there's been much of talks about tariffs.
Yes.
Now, how can tariffs work in economies where you don't manufacture much anymore?
They don't. That's the thing. Tariffs are a very, very important tool for a developing economy. You need to protect your nascent industries from the more advanced foreign industries to get your production up to speed. Well, it's kind of pointless in that context. I'm not saying tariffs are pointless in and of themselves. Tariffs are vastly preferable to income taxes and that sort of thing. But in terms of trade war and production, there's not really much point in pushing tariffs in a punitive sense when you don't have any infant industries to protect.
Yeah.
I mean, what is the point of protectionism when there's nothing to protect?
Yeah.
And so unless we see some sort of major Marshall Plan for U.S. industry, I don't see what
with what money?
Well, the thing is the talk of 100% tariffs came up in context of BRICS and defending the U.S. dollar. The problem with those threats is that they've already evicted Russia from the U.S. dollar.
Exactly.
And already, Russia and China and some of the oil states, in one, I'm trying to remember if it was Russia and India, or it was two BRIC states, but it wasn't Russia and China, it was Russia and somebody else. They're already conducting something like 97% of their business not using the U.S. dollar. And so I think that the threats of the Trump administration on that front, on the utilization of tariffs to protect the U.S. dollar, which is simply the ability of the U.S. government to borrow more money.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that that's a very serious threat.
So let's move to the other front. We can come back if other ideas come up. But second front, which is warmer, although today there's been an announcement of ceasefire, whatever it means, whatever that means for the whoever has to enforce.
As they were bombing Syria.
Yeah, exactly. Middle East.
Well, the Middle East is interesting because, on the one hand, the Israeli operation in Gaza has been mostly successful in terms of its actual objectives.
Which are? Because I still haven't understood them.
Well, the real objective in Gaza is to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians.
So,
the
scratch to 100,000 or 100,000, whoever is counting, there's still 2 million to go.
Yes, exactly. But they've already cleared them out of 80% of the territory. And so, maybe they can try to accomplish the whole thing at once, or maybe they're going to just, do it step by step or whatever. But the point is that they're a lot closer to that than they were back, 5 years ago.
Okay.
And so, obviously it hasn't been successful in the context that they've taken a lot more casualties.
About 2,000, I was seeing yesterday.
Hamas is still fighting, and so forth. Also in the north, Hezbollah, how much territory have they taken from Hezbollah?
5 kilometers across the border.
It's nothing.
Yeah. By the way, on this point, maybe I just, if we're going to tangent on this, land warfare, whether it's mechanized or infantry, seems like it is in Ukraine here too, extremely clumsy, extremely slow. The anti-tank equipment seems to be extremely efficient on whatever armor there is today. Fortunately for the Israelis, the Merkava tanks are very well conceived in terms of crew survivability, but they lost quite a lot. They lost many tanks in that offensive, which is what, 2 months old now, 3 months old.
Well, what we learned from originally the Azerbaijani war, there's a few years before the special military operation started in Ukraine, there was the second Nagorno-Karabakh, the second war between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And the second one was really an eye-opener to anyone who follows military technology and strategy and tactics, because that was when it was clear that drones were changing everything.
Yeah.
I'll never forget seeing one video of a drone going into a trench, and just the soldiers were just helpless. And
it's like guided mortar round.
Well, what it's become actually, it started out with that, but now what it's become is basically guided hand grenades that a single soldier can throw 2 miles.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really increased the lethality of the common infantry.
In some cases, you have AI-assisted decision process, or sometimes completely 100% AI set up that's in Israel. Haaretz made an article on this saying, guys, maybe we should review the process on how we decide who we kill and who we don't, because AI oriented, if the parameter to the AI is anyone who looks Arab, you can kill. Maybe that's not very precise.
Well, they're not precise, but I mean, in fact, what they actually are, where they use them, that's not what the AI is doing. Mm-hmm. The AI is essentially killing anything that moves.
Yeah.
And the idea that we've programmed it to not target whatever. I mean, that's nonsense.
Course.
But and the reason that there's going to be this continued temptation to use.
I've seen a movie with robots killing people. Quite successful movie in the 80s. Actually, 2 of them at least.
If you know anyone named O'Connor, make sure you protect them. But the Marianne, we got your back. But the thing that to keep in mind is that these AI drones, the real reason for them is that you don't need to have the cable.
Yeah.
You can't use you can't effectively use wireless technology. Whatever 8G or whatever it is that the military use. You can't use it because it's going to get intercepted. It's easy to jam, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why the Russians have innovated with these drones that have spools of like 10 kilometers of fiber optic cable that the drone trails behind it. The problem there is obvious.
Like the original anti-tank missiles of the 60s.
Yeah, the wire. Yeah. But the problem there is obvious. You steer it around a tree, the thing gets caught on a branch, and so that's where the AI comes in, because then if you've got an AI drone that just has a basic idea of, okay, that's kind of what a tank looks like, that's kind of what a soldier looks like, just fly at it and blow it up. You eliminate the ability of jamming.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be more pressure for that.
Blend this with facial recognition, and you get something in 5 years that is used for police control.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that for the more civilized societies, I think the sooner that they take that threat seriously and ban it, that's a lot more important than all of these very important AI initiatives where the only thing that they're doing is deciding that only Google and Microsoft should be allowed to spin an AI up so that we can all receive our correct narrative protected answers.
So Lebanon, 5 kilometers in after a few months, quite a lot of casualties there as well. An Israeli economy who is bleeding very much every day through the lack of people.
Well, not only that, but also through the blockage of the ports by the Yemeni
as well.
rebels on the coast. And to me, that's been alongside. I mean, there's been three major developments in war that we've seen that have cumulatively changed everything. Number one, of course, is the drones. And that has a tremendous effect on land war.
Mm.
Number two is the hypersonic, supersonic, etc. missiles, whether you're talking about the Oreshnik with the medium-range ballistic, multiple independent re-entry vehicle, the MERV stuff, whether you're talking about that or whether you're just talking about the one-offs that they can, use to throw at a carrier or something. That's the second thing. And then the third big change is the ability of the coastal rebels to defeat the U.S. Navy.
Yeah.
The U.S. Navy had to retreat twice from the Red Sea. And, if you can't beat the Yemenis off the coast of the Red Sea, what are you going to do about China? What are you going to do about Taiwan?
Royal Navy will help the U.S. sorry for our British friends, but
the sad thing
it's
is
sad, in fact.
it's just tragic and sad listening to the British talk about their military. They were talking about sending troops to Russia.
Yeah.
I calculated on the basis of the current levels of casualties and that sort of stuff, and about what sort of casualties that the force could take before being rendered unable to fight.
5 days?
16.
16. You're...
And that's if the British sent their entire army.
Which won't happen.
Which would never happen. But the point is that even if the British sent their entire army, it would be rendered unable to continue combat.
And that's assuming they actually reach the front and they're not intercepted before.
Yeah, they're not dropping on
Mr. Oreshnik on the let's move quickly to Ukraine.
Okay.
Now, when the special operation started, we know that the first approach was what we said. Okay, now they technically won. Of course, to actually win, you need to sign a paper that says, okay, we stopped fighting. They didn't, because the British and NATO basically gave to Ukraine commitment to support them. Hence, the war continued. The Russian switched to a different strategy, which was one of attrition. What I never understood, perhaps you can enlighten me there with your opinion, is why through that attrition phase, even from the very beginning, there wasn't massive strikes on factories, manufacturing plants, energy, and also logistical hubs such as, bridges or infrastructure. And now it seems to be happening where anything that moves is targeted. And maybe you can comment on this very interesting missile that was basically demonstrated. It's like a proof of concept live on a big factory, which I presume is completely obliterated through kinetic energy alone. Why hasn't this been happening before?
Well, I think there's two reasons. Number one, first of all, they were doing it. Mm-hmm. They were fighting attrition war. But as I think it was Colonel Douglas McGregor had commented, or maybe it was Andrei Martynov, but he was talking about how there have been essentially three armies destroyed in Ukraine.
Yeah.
The first army was the proper Ukrainian army. The second army was the conscript army that they drafted. Mm-hmm. And then the third army was essentially a NATO army. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the troops who have been fighting and dying over in Ukraine in the last year have actually not been Ukrainian. Mm-hmm. And so there's a tremendous number of Americans, French, Polish, etc. Lots of different mercenaries.
Yeah.
All of them are quote unquote ex-military. How many are actually ex or were discharged right before they left for Ukraine? We have no way of knowing.
I actually noticed something which was the closest thing to an abomination I have seen in my life, which is a black Brazilian guy dying in Ukraine while fighting in a Nazi battalion for a country run by the Jewish mafia. That was weird
Yeah.
to consider
Yeah, I mean that's
on so many
that's
levels.
the advantage of globalization. You
Yeah.
can draft people from around the world, and I think that that's one reason why we saw Putin bring in the North Korean troops. North Korean troops are not being used on the general front lines. They're only being used within Russia proper, so that he has some diplomatic wiggle room that way. But part of the reason for that was just a reminder to Ukraine and to the NATO countries, we have allies too.
Of course,
In fact, we have a lot more allies than you do. They can bring over way more Korean troops, Chinese
North
troops.
Korea is what, 5 million? Potentially, I mean, all together is 5 million. It's an army of 5 million men.
Yeah, it's pretty. I mean, it's a very It's the country's only.
Yeah, they don't have much else to do, but
but
yeah.
it's a very militarized country,
Yeah.
so they have a lot more reserves that they can call upon if they wish.
It's a good training though for them.
Well, that's the other thing that NATO should be thinking about and worrying about is that the North Koreans are being trained and taught how to defeat the most advanced NATO army out there now, because of course the army that's fighting in Ukraine, which as I've said is only part Ukrainian, that's the best that they've got now. It's better than the regular U.S. Army divisions, and so it's certainly far more experienced. And
yeah, it's interesting to notice. We've seen when we were kids. We remember the U.S. Army stationed in Europe was meant to fight high intensity onslaught from the Third Shock Army of in Soviet Shock Army based out of Eastern Germany and their allies. Then it shifted to. Then it was used against Iraq to obliterate some peasants in the sand. And then it shifted with the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan to something akin to the French army, which is a special forces army made to operate in low intensity environment for counterinsurgency warfare, like you would see in Chad in the 1980s, but of course Iraq and Afghanistan. And that army now doesn't have the cadres who have ever known
no, they have
high intensity warfare ever.
Well, not only that, but Martinov correctly points out that with the exception of the U.S. Civil War, the U.S. has absolutely no experience with mass land warfare.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't have any experience in Napoleonic warfare. It doesn't have any experience of World War II, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
I mean, they did get involved a little bit in World War II and World War I and World War II on a very small scale. And so, the U.S. has good technology, but not the best anymore. It has excellent special forces.
For sure.
And then it has the U.S. Marines, who, I'm from a U.S. Marine Corps family, so of course I have nothing ill to say of that, except for the fact that
standards have been lowered.
Standards have been lowered, and also, let's face it, the Marines are not used for sophisticated forms of warfare. They're basically very, very high morale.
Sure.
If you need them to storm something very high risk, they can and they will do it. But they're also very, very small. There's two divisions.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do with two divisions against the Russian army.
Plus, what do divisions or any concentration of forces even matter when you have missiles such as the one that has been used in the last few weeks?
Well, and that's the big game changer.
Exactly.
The drones are a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
The denial of the U.S. Navy, the ability to defeat the U.S. Navy from the shore is a big deal. But Oreshnik and the development of conventional weapons with not just that kind of power, but that the ability to go unintercepted and also to hit with such effect. I mean, it's very, very difficult to understand how much that changes the diplomacy, the game theory, everything else, because for a long time everybody's been talking about how nuclear war can be avoided, and the conventional math then led to the nuclear math and so forth. Well, now the conventional math is much, much greater. You can't go nuclear in response to that
To a
sort of,
conventional attack.
yeah, I mean, if
You risk too much.
exactly, because once you go nuclear, they go nuclear. And so, setting aside all of the conspiracy stuff that calls into question whether nukes even exist, but when you look at what they've accomplished with Oreshnik, and what's really remarkable is the way that the Europeans and the Americans have been largely silent about it, which to me indicates, counterintuitively, indicates what a big deal it is.
Yes.
They don't dare blow it off. They don't dare say that nothing's changed. Instead, they're just running around acting like it never happened.
Or that it's meaningless, which is even more fun. By the way, an interesting element is that this missile system, let's call it this way, is based for the launcher part on some quite proven and relatively old system,
Right.
because the departure is by definition unannounced, and that's not where you would intercept or attempt to intercept. It's too unpredictable. So the launcher is an old system because you have to bring this to a certain height, and then the technology is in the booster, which has the warheads,
Right.
which are not only speed but don't go in a parabolic, trajectory. They have this ability to move at high speeds, that is the key. I mean, you can do hypersonic, but and that's hard enough. But then make it move, making it unpredictable, making it fly to unexpected targets at the last minute or second in this case, and the fact that you can arm it with nuclear or conventional. Actually, you don't really need explosive with that speed, but you can either choose a nuclear war or just make a big iron spike of 100 kilograms at this kind of speed. The kinetic energy obliterates, a couple of square meters, and in depth as well, and goes very deep.
But
so yeah.
On the other side, I think that we do need to point out that one advantage that the U.S. military does have to counter that is diversity.
Yeah, because it is a strength by itself. So
I mean, it's comical to the point of tragedy to just listen to the blithering nonsense that we hear out of the U.S. officer corps, the British officer corps, the NATO generals talking about this stuff. I mean, and it especially because they're obviously misleading the people. The small number of people who are actually paying attention to this stuff at all through the mainstream media are just being led wildly astray, which is why it's so important that you do these videos, that you talk about this kind of thing, because the reality is that we've completely gone past the Cold War now. We're past the Cold War. We're past the post-Cold War. This is a new era of warfare.
Yes, completely. And in fact, it's interesting because the scientists who have this doomsday clock, and I must say to whoever's watching this, it doesn't actually exist, because I know some people actually believe that there is such a thing as a doomsday clock, and it actually does measure the fact that we are at 90 seconds to midnight to nuclear war, and they say, but it can start anytime in the next 90 seconds. I say, it's a metaphor.
There's not an actual clock in Basel, Switzerland that, if it ever reaches midnight, the world.
Yeah, it's like when I was a kid, I knew some people who actually think when there was the bomb, they actually thought there was the bomb. There was one.
Just
and that they really hoped that no one would use it.
With a big red button that only the president could push.
Yeah, either sides could actually press the button, and you don't want that. So this So is it alarmist? Is it in your opinion, are we really in a risky terms? Because here's an idea. When indeed tomorrow, let's say France sends troops, or sends a missile that actually passes through
the scalp
and
missile.
actually does make some significant damage, and one such Russian missile obliterates the Dassault factory somewhere in France, or the Safran complex of manufacturing. Because there's not many in France, but there's one or two factories,
Right.
and these can be obliterated pretty fast. Even if they call before and they say, well, look, you have 10 minutes to leave because we don't necessarily want to kill the people, just for. That means they can actually target command centers, and they can actually target those trans admirals, which have a lot of kinetic energy by themselves.
I think they're probably going to have to do a few more of those Oreshnik strikes on various targets that are not Ukrainian in order for people to take it seriously.
Yeah.
And one of the thing of Putin is a very patient and reasonable guy, and he's probably too patient and reasonable to communicate effectively through signals with the leaders of the West.
Now, Trump is going to be in 2 months' time, roughly?
More like closer to 6 weeks. January 6th or thereabouts.
What is in your opinion the probability or the possibilities that the administration that is leaving accelerates the chaos or actually pushes for something?
They are.
They are.
They're trying to, but I don't think
from where there's no return, to the point where, let's say, now we go kinetic.
I don't think that there's much likelihood of that. That's what they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
But fortunately, the leaders on the other side, Putin, Xi, even the leaders of Iran,
mm-hmm.
they're all very controlled.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all very self-controlled. They don't subscribe to that stupid idea.
And they can afford to wait.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that's crazy is that there's this, the media loves this notion that, in fact, we were watching The Sum of All Fears recently. And one thing that you kept hearing in that movie from the presidential was, if we don't respond, we'll appear weak. I mean, this is total nonsense.
Yeah. It's not the only nonsensical thing in that movie. If I remember, it's Nazis who actually plot to have Russians and Americans obliterate themselves so that they can take over the world again.
It's like Russian.
They are very well known to do that, the Nazis. Be careful, they're everywhere.
especially in Russia these days. That always puzzled me because, like, we went from the communists in Russia being the bad guys to Nazis in Russia. Nazis in Germany being the bad guys before, then communists in Russia, and then Nazis in Russia. So I mean, it was very confusing. But anyhow, the thing that really struck me was that they kept saying, all the advisors kept saying, if we don't allow ourselves to be manipulated by the circumstances, we will appear to be weak, and we can't have that. And that makes if you stop and think about it, it makes no sense. If you don't allow yourself to be manipulated in a very shallow and obvious way, then that's better than the alternative. And one thing we've seen, Putin gets criticized from pro-Russian sources for not maintaining his red lines.
Yeah, I'm actually back from Russia, and that's what I heard. A lot of people they're fully committed. Even the people who were not at the beginning, now they're fully committed to let's go. I mean, if they have to go to Berlin, they will go to Berlin. However, how they go to Kiev and Berlin, there's debate, and
well, it's clear. The Russians don't want.
No, they won't go to Berlin. It's a saying that I heard.
But they are willing to. They've done it before. I mean, that's the thing. The Russians have been to Paris before. They've been to Berlin before.
To Warsaw. Several times.
They will do it if they feel the need. But it's pretty obvious that they don't want it. They don't
No,
want
and
to
in
keep
fact,
it.
what I heard a lot was to say, well, look, we actually want the parts of Ukraine that actually we consider ours, and we'll
Like up to the Dnieper River.
yeah, and a bit more, but that's about it. They don't care. But they all say that if it has to go to war with NATO, they shouldn't bother to lose men on conventional war. They should just obliterate every single city, army base, naval base, and industry in NATO countries, and that's it.
Yeah. Well,
That's from the people. It doesn't mean it's the policy. Yeah?
right. But the thing is, and that's why I've written this publicly, that I suspect that the next Oreshnik demonstration will be on a U.S. military base in a NATO country that isn't Ukraine.
I think the missile base in Poland is a juicy target.
I would assume so. I mean, the Polish people, unfortunately, have drunk too much of the clown world Kool-Aid. I mean, they've got their own historical reasons for not being affectionate about the Russians, and that's understandable. But at the end of the day, Russia doesn't want to destroy Poland.
No, it doesn't care. I mean,
the clown world does. NATO does. NATO is not protecting Poland in any way, shape, or form.
Like it isn't protecting Ukraine, because I sometimes the more we go ahead, I wonder if the plan on the Western side isn't just let's weaken Russia, and if we have to kill as many Ukrainians as possible, that's a bonus.
Oh, I think that's
or maybe it's the opposite. We actually want to empty Ukraine, and if we can weaken Russia, it's a bonus.
I think it's absolutely the case. I mean, we've actually heard a number of Israelis saying that they want to set up a second Israel in Ukraine. Now, why they think that Russia would accept that?
There's already a Birobidzhan there's already a Russian state in the Russian Federation.
Yeah, but I don't think that the Russians would be particularly keen about
weather, maybe.
Oh, that too. But when you look at the situation, it's pretty clear that Russia has the strategic and tactical dominance. They've already defeated NATO. It's just a question of, do they have to push to the unconditional surrender or what? And I think a lot of the Trumpian bellicosity is an understanding of that situation, and they're just trying to do what Trump always does, which is get a better deal than you imagine you can.
Before we go on what can happen in February, just yesterday there was a renewal of the Syrian rebels against Aleppo, and could that front and with air support, it seems, from Israel. What a mess. I mean, there's Russian air defense systems, Syrian troops, rebels.
That not only can, but probably will. And because we don't even know who's on whose side. I mean, on the one hand, on the European front, Turkey has been making noises almost as if they're going to withdraw from NATO and join BRICS, and then
which they should.
And then they're
for them
teaming up with Israel to support the Syrian rebels. I mean, I can't even keep. I can't even.
It's very complicated.
I can't even keep track of who is attacking whom.
The Middle East used to be such a simple place for the last 3,000 years. Suddenly, it's becoming complicated.
I mean, it's always a complete mess. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is, whatever happened to the war between Israel and Iran?
Yeah.
I mean, for days it was, a massive attack is imminent on Tehran. A massive attack is imminent on Tel Aviv. And then literally nothing happened.
Yeah, because both sides seems to fire stuff which are duds or without warheads, just to prove a point that we can do it, and
it's like,
voila,
so
that's
we
it.
Can do it and you can do it, so now what?
Now that it seems Iran has nukes as well, we'll see.
Or even if they don't have nukes.
Even if they don't.
If they don't have nukes, what I mean, can you imagine what an Oreshnik could do in a tiny place like Israel?
Well, there is EIA Industries. There is all customers I've sold to in the past. All these companies I know. I mean, they're on Google Earth.
So if you want to know who's to blame,
They no, I sold software. It was sales software, CRM systems. But all these companies who manufacture weapons in Israel, they're well known.
yeah,
They convert the technology that America gives them, so that they can resell it to China, stuff like that. But they also manufacture their own planes. The airframes of the Israeli Air Force are very old. F-15s, F-16s.
Right.
They're like 40 years old, and so they need to refurbish. So they have lots of factories, which is a big source of employment in Israel, the defense industry. But yeah, a missile like that would obliterate vast amounts of industrial surface,
right.
and without making much casualties.
And they couldn't complain that they'd been nuked.
Yeah. So yeah, it's we're entering a new world. I agree with you.
Yeah, it's I mean, obviously it's a bit frightening in some ways, but it's also frankly good to know that at least there are some alternatives to mutually assured destruction. That was and also, to be honest, it does tend to cast some doubt about what the realities are. I mean, if there's one thing that we both know, it's that our understanding of what the world actually is probably 10%
Yes.
of what's real at best. I mean, at this point, I wouldn't, if they came out today and said that, aliens are real and there's a Nazi base in Antarctica and space doesn't exist.
The plan has worked.
I mean, if all that stuff came out and was being reported on the news, I wouldn't even blink.
Yeah.
I mean, at this point, practically anything goes.
Anything goes.
And so that's the world we live in, which is frankly kind of fascinating.
It is.
I'm enjoying all these disclosures.
I am.
But,
Now, to finish on the economic aspect of things, February we have a new administration. However, it's going to be finalized and set up, and how long it can last in its original premier form. We do have a debt, especially in the West and particularly in the United States, which is infinite almost. It's abysmally huge. We have inflation that has not stopped. We have interest rates that seems to go even lower by then, which is not going to help with the inflation. We have especially the real economy in Europe particularly, but also in the US, with tanking. Russia just announced that it will cut the remaining 10% of gas that actually flows through. I think only Hungary is going to be spared, but the last 10% of Europe's source of gas coming from the east is going to be cut. Which was also a weird thing, that while the war was going on, 10% of our consumption of gas throughout Europe is going through Ukraine from Russia.
Right.
Weird. So the bizarre system.
Well, why cut the other 90% if you're going to keep that going?
Yeah. And so the German industries are dying. Whatever is left of industries in Europe is dying. We're going to have massive unemployment next few years. Now it almost looks like it is the objective that was.
It is the objective.
It's the Morgenthau plan for the West.
Well, the U.S. is trying to salvage itself.
Yes.
And it's trying to salvage itself at the cost of Europe.
Yes.
And because it owns the mainstream European political parties, it's able to do that. There's not a single European government outside of Hungary that and Serbia, other than those two, there's not a single government that is actually really attempting to operate in the interests of its people.
Yes.
They're just a bunch of puppets.
Yes.
And you see that when, Germany's obviously the worst.
It's a disaster.
Poland sometimes seems a little bit nuts, but it's usually has to do with Russia. Mm-hmm. Same with the Finns, but when you hear the Germans talk about things, they will literally come right out and say, even if it's bad for Germany and the Germans, we have to do this. And I think they mean it literally, but they're not talking about we Germany. They're talking about we, them, the politicians, because they don't want their whatever their blackmail is. They don't want that being released. And so, yeah. So I don't think we have a word for whatever rule by blackmailed politician is, but we probably need one, because that seems to be the forget democracy and oligarchy and all this kind of stuff. I mean, that's what we appear to have, and it's just not a viable system.
Now, perhaps one last question on a completely different topic, which is maybe less funny, but it is, I think, important. As you know, now in the solar system, Saturn has the second biggest ring in a planet, in a system. However, the biggest ring seems to be the pedophile ring around Hollywood.
Yeah, that's a definitely sizable and definitely of planetary proportions.
Is it linked with the politicians? As you just mentioned, there may be some blackmail.
Oh, there's definitely links. I mean, I don't know how far it goes. What you're seeing with P. Diddy and what you were seeing before with Epstein,
yeah,
I think are just scratching the surface.
When you were yourself a big star in the music business,
by which you mean whatever the smallest definition of white dwarf is, that would be about it.
You were obviously much younger, but did you have any suspicion that something like that was going around, or were you too young and naive to even imagine that such things were happening?
No, well, it's a little bit hard to say, just because the record label that I was on was a notoriously degenerate label, to the point that I think it was Billboard magazine actually made a joke about because we had a bit of more of a pop sound to us than any of the other bands on the label. They were wondering if we were going to get beaten up by the other bands, like Ministry and KMFDM.
Okay.
But so Wax Trax was, I mean, you can watch. There's a documentary about Wax Trax. You can watch it and you'll see what I mean. But 15 years ago, I realized that everybody that I knew from the label, with one exception, was already dead. Yeah, that's the way.
So it was the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It was not the illegal. Well, I guess it is illegal. It wasn't the kids and the baby oil.
I don't think so, because first of all, they didn't have enough success. There was a bit of a rivalry between what was it? The Seattle label, Pop Sonic or whatever it was. It's a label that Pop something. It was the label that Nirvana and Soundgarden and all those bands were on. And prior to Nirvana coming out and getting big, there had been Sub Pop. That was it. There was a rival between Sub Pop and Wax Trax for several years, and then Sub Pop won big time. But what was interesting was that I think that they would not have anything to do with that, simply because in order to be useful, you have to survive long enough. And I'm not saying that they couldn't have had a lot of good material on the label and artists on that label.
Yeah, I understand.
I just think that was totally pointless, because these guys weren't going to be around long enough to be worthwhile.
So, yeah.
But what I did see and what I did hear was on the political side, was because my parents were involved in state level politics, and so I did get a bit of a glimpse of national politics. I met people like Donald Trump, George W. Bush, et cetera, back in the late 80s. And I did see what I now recognize to be glimpses of that sort of thing, but not like the kids and stuff, but I mean just the the corruption
Yeah.
and the complete lack of any sort of the morality that they claim to represent and be interested in. It wasn't. It was just pure fame, money, power, and sex. That was all they were interested. There wasn't even a hint of drugs.
Mm.
You know.
Yeah.
And one thing that did confuse me a lot at the time was, someone had said something about, oh, you know, you should run for Congress someday or something. And I laughed and I said something about, I'm on wax tracks. I probably have an excessive number of skeletons in the closet. And this
They
guy
like that.
Well, no, but the thing is, I was pointing out that from my naive, conventional understanding of how politics works, that's a no-go.
Mm.
Yeah, because this is back in the time.
Yeah, in the 80s.
This is back in the time when, you know,
Barbara Bush was campaigning against rock and roll, against rap music.
Well, it was a big deal, like the whole Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
I tried marijuana, but I didn't inhale.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
and so, you know, your naive assumption as a young 20-something as well, you know, then obviously if you can't possibly be a politician if those are the rules. And then this major, and I do mean like major, political strategist said, oh, it just waved it out. He says, oh, that's not a problem. And I remember thinking, really? But I didn't think any more of it, you know, because I had no desire to go that way. But it was years later that I went, wait a minute, you know, and that's why I'm 100% positive that with very, very few exceptions, you do not get to any level of state or national influence in the United States without being compromised in some way. Like, for example,
Yes.
there was a guy, I knew a guy who was running for governor, strong candidate, absolute favorite to win. And he got completely nuked, like a month before the election, by a story about how he had like made a pass at his daughter's underage friend. And, you know, I don't know, was that something that he had, you know, had done on his own and it was found out, or what you know, I have no idea. I'm not involved in those circles and I'm very happy not to be. But I remember even thinking at the time, that just didn't seem like him. Like, you know, I met the guy, you know, now you never know, obviously, but you know, when there's anomalies and when things don't fit, you know, you just kind of raises questions in your head. And so I remember at the time thinking, I wonder if that was even real, you know?
Wow.
And if it wasn't, why would he go along with it and allow his, you know, campaign to get nuked? And, you know, and then why would you like initially deny it and then just go ahead and accept it and accept that you were going to be governor? I mean, you know, there's, like I said, we understand, like, you know, the Bible says that we see now as though through a glass darkly. That's true, of course, when it comes to spiritual things, spiritual world, heaven, etc. But I do think to a certain extent it's also true of our physical material world, the political system, the governments. There's all kinds of stuff going on that we, as normal people, don't know about, and, you know, frankly, we'll probably never know about.
Of course. Of course.
All we can do is try to make good decisions for ourselves and our families. You know, we're like little fish swimming in the ocean, and, you know, when a big whale comes by and his tail is thrashing all over the place, you know, you try to stay out of the way.
Yeah. So next time we'll meet will be 2025. We'll see if the swamp has been starting to be drained, or if it was more to my liking, turned into a huge concrete parking lot.
Or if the people who are promising to fix it are actually trying to expand it. I mean, we just don't know.
We don't know. In all cases, I thank you very much. Merry Christmas to everyone. A few days ahead, of course. We're 25 days before Christmas. And in the meantime, prepare yourselves. Thank you. That was good.